Hello, Mr. Wood here. We're going to be looking today at the GCSE RS paper, Specification A, Part 1, the study of religions. We're looking at the Judaism paper. We're looking at beliefs and teaching and practices today. Right, we're going to dive straight on in. Now, question 1 with every GCSE paper starts the same way in RS. It starts with a multiple choice question. And so question 1 is, which one of the following is used by Jews to describe the nature of God? Put a tick in the box next to the correct answer. So we're looking for the nature of God. And our choices are imperfect, merciful, limited, and mortal. Now, before I jump into answer, I want to look at each word and just think about each one. Now, imperfect means not perfect. And I know that most of us who are religious or have any idea about religion would say that God is perfect or close to perfect. So imperfect is probably not the correct answer. Merciful means he gives people second chances, which is something we know about God, so that's a potential good one there. So we might underline that and come back to that in a second. Limited means that incapable of doing everything, and actually most of us, when we remember what we learn about God is that he's omnipotent, so he can do all things, and mortal, which means it's possible for him to die. You might remember from the French word mort, which means death. You might not, but mortal means that you could die. And so the most likely one here is the word merciful. So we'll give that a tick and then move on to the next one. Give 2 Jewish beliefs about life after death. 2 Jewish beliefs about life after death. Now, this actually confused a lot of people when they took this paper because they were worried about the idea of heaven and hell. Well, we know that heaven and hell are Christian beliefs. Are they beliefs in Judaism as well? Now, that's a really good question to ask because actually heaven and hell aren't words that we generally use in Judaism. But there are a few things that we know. I mean, remember, this is a 2-mark question. And because it's a 2-mark question, we only need to write very short answers. So one Jewish belief about life after death is that God will judge. Very simple. God will judge, and that will get you 1 mark on that. Jews believe that after death, there will come a time of judgment. Another idea about life after death is the idea of Gan Eden, which is the idea that potentially Jews might go back to a perfect living arrangement, just like in the Garden of Eden. It's similar to the word Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, and that's one Jewish idea as well. There's lots of other things you can write for this one that would get you the mark. You could write that there will be a resurrection. Not to be confused with Jesus' resurrection. This is talking about the resurrection of all the Jews. You could use some other great key terms here. Olam Haba, which means the world to come. You could use the keyword Sheol, which is the place of the dead. Or you could even write that life after death is not an important Jewish belief, and they'd like to focus more on this life than the life to come. Question 1.3. Explain 2 ways in which the covenant with Abraham influences Jews today, and it's a 4-mark question. Now, keywords in this sentence are ways, covenant, Abraham, and influences. And so we're looking for 2 things which need an expansion to get that 4th mark. Covenant, one of our really, really important Jewish words there, covenant, which means special agreement. And we know it's the Abraham covenant, not the Moses covenant, the Abraham covenant. We're also looking at this word here, influences, which basically means what does it make Jews do today? What does it lead Jews to do today because of this covenant? Right, so if we think about the covenant with Abraham, there's different aspects to it. 3 main things that Jews have to do to keep the covenant with God. The first one is they need to be circumcised. So we can write down, be circumcised. That's 1 mark for that. And to add a bit of additional information, we just have to say what circumcision is. So we can write removal of the foreskin of the penis. And that's for every male. Second part of the covenant is that the Jews are promised a certain part of land, a land called Canaan, which is near modern-day Israel. And so we could write, live in or near Israel. And then for our second point, this is the promised land from God. And that would get us 4 marks. Question 1.4 says, explain 2 Jewish teachings about charity. And this is our 5-mark question. Now, the 5-marker, we must try and get some sort of Jewish teaching in here, some sort of special scriptural reference or key Hebrew word in here to make sure that we get that extra 5th mark. So, 2 Jewish teachings about charity. Now, hopefully you can remember one of your 3 moral principles in Judaism is called tzedakah. Now, don't worry too much about the spelling of tzedakah, because you can spell it lots of different ways, and you will not be assessed on your spelling on this particular question in question 5. It's only question 5, actually, not on question 4. So tzedakah is one of our key moral teachings in Judaism. So if we write tzedakah is one of the key moral principles in Judaism and means justice and charity. Jews are expected to give away 10% of their income. And we get 3 marks there, actually. We get 2 marks for making a point and developing it. And our 3rd mark comes in because we've used a key Jewish teaching there. We've referred to it. Another one we can use for this one is another one of the key moral principles, which is Tikkun Olam. And it means healing the world. And you might just say that healing the world can include charity, because Jews are giving to the poor potentially in order to have social justice around the world. This leads to the final question on this part of the paper, which is 1.5. This is the 12 marker with the 3 additional marks for SPAG, for spelling, punctuation and grammar. This is a big question in the paper. If you're ever intimidated by this question, it's always important just to have a go. Examiners generally are very liberal with how they give out the 3 marks for SPAG. So if you're really, really unsure what to write, do have a go anyway, because you want to try and get those 3 marks just for doing the spelling, punctuation, grammar, even if you write stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's have a look at the question. Jews do not have to follow all of the Mitzvot. And then we're told what that is there, the Jewish laws. So Jews do not have to follow all of the Mitzvot, the Jewish laws. Let's break this question down bit by bit. So we know that it's only applying to Jews, so not other faiths. It's in the negative, they do not have to follow all of the Mitzvot. Now you might remember, of the Mitzvot, there's 613 rules, which is obviously quite a lot of rules. And we know that they're the Jewish laws. Now we're going to set this out like we set out most of our 12-mark questions. We're going to do the some, others, and then I think. So some Jews, other Jews, I think that. This is just our plan here, as we're thinking before we dive straight into the question. So, some Jews would probably agree with this statement. They'd agree and they'd say that no, Jews don't have to follow all of the mitzvot. We'll remember that some Jews are liberal Jews or Reform Jews. And we know that they've adapted their idea of Judaism to fit the modern time. So there's some rules they do not do. Famously, one of the rules they wouldn't follow, and it's a good one to get in there, is do not trim the edges of your beard. I'm just going to write down a little bit of that because I'll remember the main thing when I write it in a minute. So that's obviously quite an obscure Jewish rule, and they probably wouldn't follow that one. There's also some rules that they can't follow today because some laws need the temple to be followed. Potentially some rules might come across as sexist in today's modern age, and that'd be enough to get us that first half. Other Jews would disagree with this statement, and those Jews would likely to be our Orthodox Jews who try and follow the teaching of the Torah as close to it as they possibly can. And so we could give a little description about who they are, and they'd say that following the Mitzvot, the Torah, is important for many reasons. One of the reasons, it's that really important key word again, covenant. It's the covenant with Moses. We know it's important because it's in the Torah. We know it's important because it involves the Ten Commandments. And then the final bit would be your opinion as to whether you agree or disagree. So I'd go with an agreement on there. And I'd simply take that plan and I'd put that into action below it. And so for our first paragraph, I've written, some Jews, for example, liberal and reformed Jews, would agree. They would say that many of the 613 mitzvot are irrelevant today. For example, in Leviticus it says, do not cut the hair on your temples or trim the corners of your beard. This is an irrelevant and unrealistic rule to follow in 2019. Furthermore, some rules require a Jew to go to the temple, and there is no Jewish temple at present, and so those rules are impossible to follow. Lastly, some rules are for men, and so women would not be able to follow them anyway. We now turn to what other Jews might think. For this paragraph, I've written, other Jews would disagree. They might say that all of the mitzvot are still relevant today and should be followed. For example, many Orthodox Jews would aim to follow every mitzvah. One reason for this is because of the covenant with Moses. The special agreement put in place on Mount Sinai was that all the Jews would follow all the mitzvot, and in return, God would keep them free from slavery and be their protective God. The mitzvot include the Ten Commandments, which are widely held to be very important rules. For example, do not kill and do not steal. These are important rules for every Jew to live by. The mitzvot are recorded in the Torah. This is considered to come directly from God, and so Jews could certainly try to follow all of them. We now move to the final part of the 12 marker, which is our own opinion. And so finally, just to finish, I've written, I think the Jews should not follow every mitzvah. Some are only for men, some are impossible to follow since the destruction of the temple, and some are simply irrelevant today. I then read the whole thing through again. If I'd missed out any opportunity to put any Bible verses, I'd then put a star in and add them on just to make sure it's as strong an argument as I can possibly make. And then I'd finish cross through the plan and then move on to the next part of the paper.